千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. So our talk today begins with two columns, the one on the left showing the sage, the one on the right showing the tyrant. So in the Tao Te Ching, these are the two diametrically opposite archetypes. The sage is someone who leads or serves with the Tao. The tyrant, of course, is someone who oppresses with authority, with the abuse of power. So when we talk about them in modern day vernacular, the sage is what we today would call the servant leader, someone who leads, but someone who has the servant humble mentality. The tyrant in today's verbiage would be the autocratic leader, someone who tries to dominate with a domineering personality. And let's talk about the difference between the two. For the sage and servant leader, one characteristic that's been observed in thousands of years is listening. The sage is interested in hearing what people have to say. The tyrant, not so much. The tyrant loves the sound of his own voice. When the tyrant is asking others for their opinions, what the tyrant really wants is affirmation of what he already thought, validation, and perhaps flattery. So remember, these are archetypes. These represent common patterns seen every day, everywhere in life. So as an example, you can apply this to all different walks of life. The horrible boss, the quote-unquote the boss from hell, that would be simply a manifestation of the tyrant, the right-hand column. Another characteristic of the sage is that of empathy. The sage is empathetic. The sage cares about how people feel. Now, when I list out these two characteristics as others that are following, it is the same in that it'll make it clear there's a pathway for you and I to sagehood, that we can become more like the sage if we listen with empathy. So the sage is the one not only listens, but cares about how people feel. Whereas you can imagine the tyrant does not care. The tyrant is egocentric. The tyrant cares, but only about his own feelings, his own likes and dislikes. There's no consideration for others. And I was just talking about the horrible boss. If you think about it, the horrible boss has these characteristics without a doubt. Another characteristic is persuasion. That is, the sage explains why. The sage explains the best path with sound reasoning. The sage is enlisting people to the cause, and these people, having been convinced by reason, are willing participants. This is very different from the approach of the tyrants. The enlisting of the tyrants is not so much a request, but a command. The tyrant expects unquestioning obedience. And next, we have the characteristic of community. The sage builds communities. The sage builds and strengthens relationships among people. Whereas it isn't so much about the community for the tyrants, but the hierarchy, the levels above and below. The tyrant enforces this power structure that oppresses everyone at the bottom. Now, it is worth noting that when you create strong personal bonds, the sage is somebody that people remember, and people will come back and seek out the sage when they can, whenever possible. Same with the servant leader. Whereas the damage on personal relationships means that for the tyrant, people try to get away from the tyrant as soon as possible. The next characteristic, inspiring, being inspirational. This is to say, the sage provides a vision that motivates people. It's not just about why should we do this? It is envisioning, just imagine what will happen if we do this, if we head down this path. The benefits to us, the safety and security, the reasons why we should do it in a compelling vision. That vision motivates. So instead of being inspirational, the tyrant is intimidating. It is not so much inspiring people, enlisting them to a vision for the future, but forcing them. It's coercion. And the purpose is for the glory of the tyrants. In the example of the horrible boss, basically the horrible boss wants to look good and doesn't care how he gets the people, forces the people to work on his behalf so he can look good. And then we have foresight. The sage looks ahead, makes long-term plans. The sage is a planner. It is not true that in the Tao, people are supposed to just wander around without a specific goal in mind. The sage is always looking at the journey of 1,000 miles with a destination, with a direction. That journey of 1,000 miles is a long-term plan. On the other hand, the tyrant is short-sighted. The tyrant is all about immediate gratification. Now, when we look at these comparisons, I want everyone to mentally envision how this applies in ancient China so long ago, but also apply them today. And the challenge in applying this to our world today is to let go of the preconceptions of Western culture, but instead think universally. For instance, when we talk about the family, the team, I want everyone to think in terms of group dynamics in general. After all, the Tao is not about East or West, but the entire world, humanity overall. So when we talk about leader in this context, It doesn't have to be the CEO, the horrible boss that I mentioned, the manager of a department. I want to invite you to think instead about the person who, out of wisdom and compassion, provides support and guidance in the background. Now, in ancient China, this person may not be the king or the general, but the strategist who provides advice and plans deployment, missions, ambush, negotiations, and so on. Indeed, there's a wealth of stories about this kind of person from the Three Kingdoms period. Its most famous strategist, Kongming, was not the ruler. He served the ruler. But there was no question that he was a leader of the Tao, what we would call a servant leader today. In modern times, we also have many such examples. Think about a family. The mother who raises her kids may not be the head of the household. And perhaps in her family, her husband is the primary breadwinner and therefore usually considered the head of the family, but that doesn't matter because there can be no doubt of her central role. She is in front, as Lao Tzu puts it. She is a servant leader. She is the heart and soul of her family. For another example, think about sports. A professional sports team in modern times, at the very least, has a team owner, a team manager. Among the athletes themselves in that team, there is a team captain. The person that Lao Tzu describes can be one of these individuals, team owner, team manager, team captain, but not necessarily. And that is the crucial point. It may be, for example, the coach who places himself last, supporting all the players, but then ends up in front because he is the true servant leader of the team. So to further illustrate this concept, I'd like to take everyone to a diagram that depicts everything visually, especially the before and after, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. In this diagram, I have the before and after depicted as what I call the initial state and the end state. Here is the initial state. So the person in the back of the group is the sage. As you saw in the previous slide, the group is generic in nature. Doesn't have to be co-workers in the office. It can also be family, circle of friends, community, your church, sports team, a club. It's basically any setting where people gather together for a common purpose. In that setting, the sage supports the group in the back, behind the scenes. The sage, quote unquote, there's quotation marks around the sage. The sage is not some wise old man, but the sage is a generic representation of a wise person of any possible age or gender. The only requirement is that this person must be genuine in his or her desire to be of service. This would be a wish to see the group do well, not a plot or a scheme to advance oneself. So what happens when people see this? They see this capable individual who's serving the entire group, and they realize it is genuine. And they can see that it's genuine because the sage is consistent over time. You get to know someone after a length of time. They can therefore see it is in their best interest to pay more attention to the sage. This begins the process in group dynamics to elevate the profile of the sage to the end state. This is to say, the people in the group, they will move the sage toward the front and center of the group, and this provides greater leverage for the sage to be even more of a service to the group as a whole. This is a more prominent role. It may not be a formal leading position. It may just be attention and respect accorded to someone that everybody in the group trusts. Somebody that everybody knows has valuable things to contribute to the entire group. And therefore, as I mentioned, by this idea means it may not be leading the charge at all. When Lao Tzu says that people put the sage in front, it may or may not be leading the charge. It can just be providing inspiration or motivation. So I want to ask everyone to keep your thoughts flexible as you apply this life pattern to the many different situations we can come across in life. As you observe these different situations, keep in mind the passage from this chapter. Therefore, the sages place themselves last, but end up in front. And that is how this works. Previously, we talked about heaven and earth. We talked about how they exist indefinitely. They exist for the myriad of things, not for themselves. And we want to emulate that example. We want to dial down selfish concerns. We want to live for something that is greater. And when we do so, we're definitely going to notice the difference that this makes in life. Summary for today is about the sages, about how they can be putting themselves in the back, they can be outside of themselves in terms of their concerns. So putting themselves in the back is what we call servant leadership, providing assistance and support to everyone. And the natural consequence of that is people will place you front and center. So I want to invite everybody to see yourself as the servants of the group, not the master. And I will further say, you're going to have a great time doing this, following this teaching, because life is all about building good relationships. Everybody you help, everybody you get to know is like a fascinating book waiting for you to read. You're going to have a great time. Number 2, take care of others. Practice compassion, caring for the welfare of the group. The group will take excellent care of you. This goes back to our diagram of karmic energy exchange. The caring you put out comes back to you at least threefold. It is also related to number 1 because the value that you place on the group comes back to you as the value that the group will place on you. It therefore makes perfect sense that they want to bring you out from the back and place you in the front. Number 3, practice altruism. Here, I want to say work to benefit the group rather than yourself. You end up with the greatest benefits of all. That is to say, you plant the seeds of altruistic actions. In time, you will enjoy the blooming flowers, bountiful harvest, ample rewards in life. And this is the best way to go because it is the way that nature works. The results are all but guaranteed because it is the Tao. These 3 points that you see here are related and interconnected. I invite you to think of them as 3 refracting surfaces of the wish fulfillment gem held by the Bodhisattva. They may shine in different ways, but they originate from the same light. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.